What was the dumb rule they made specifically because of you? Our school had a detention system that was so absurdly boring it honestly felt less like a punishment and more like a government-funded study on psychological torture. The idea was simple: if you got detention, you stayed after school for 1 hour. That didn't sound too bad at first. The problem was what happened during that hour, or rather, what didn't happen. You couldn't talk, you couldn't read, you couldn't do homework, you couldn't listen to music, you couldn't draw, you couldn't sleep, you couldn't even rest your head on the desk. The official rule was that students were expected to sit quietly and reflect on their actions. In reality, you sat in a hard plastic chair and stared at a beige wall while time slowed to a pace that shouldn't have been scientifically possible. The first detention I got was because I was late to class. The second was also because I was late to class. The third was because I got lost trying to avoid the vice principal after being late to class. Looking back, I wasn't exactly helping my case. By the time I earned detention number 3, I had developed a deep hatred for that room. It was always the same. The same buzzing fluorescent lights, the same faded walls, the same smell of old textbooks and disappointment, and always Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Schwartz was the teacher assigned to supervise detention. He wasn't mean. Honestly, that would have been easier. He was just permanently exhausted. The man looked like he'd been teaching since the invention of fire. Every afternoon he'd sit at the front desk with a cup of coffee and stare at us with the enthusiasm of someone attending their own tax audit. The first few detentions, I tried entertaining myself by thinking, that sounds easy until you've spent 40 minutes staring at the same crack in the wall. After a while your brain starts doing strange things. I remember spending one detention trying to determine whether a stain near the ceiling looked more like Abraham Lincoln or a dead squirrel. By the end of the hour I had created an entire fictional backstory for the stain. That was when I realized something: if I kept attending these detentions, I was eventually going to lose my mind. So I decided to fight back, not by behaving better. That would have been the logical solution. Instead, I taught myself Morse code. I remember spending one detention trying to determine whether a stain near the ceiling looked more like Abraham Lincoln or a dead squirrel. By the end of the hour I had created an entire fictional backstory for the stain. That was when I realized something: if I kept attending these detentions, I was eventually going to lose my mind. So I decided to fight back, not by behaving better. That would have been the logical solution. Instead, I taught myself Morse code. So I spent half the night memorizing dots and dashes. By midnight I could recognize most letters. By 1 in the morning, I was spelling words. By 2 in the morning, I had convinced myself I was some kind of undercover spy preparing for a classified mission. The mission, unfortunately, was detention. The next day I arrived with a plan. More importantly, I arrived with a target: my friend Jonas. Jonas was one of those guys who practically lived in detention. I genuinely think he spent more time in that room than some teachers. If detention had membership rewards, he would have reached platinum status. Before school ended, I secretly handed him a small sheet of paper. On it was a Morse code chart. He stared at it, then stared at me, then back at the chart. "Trust me," I whispered. That should have been his warning to walk away. Instead, he nodded, which was mistake number 1. When detention started, everything looked normal. Mr. Schwartz took attendance, read the rules, reminded everyone about silence, then sat down at his desk. 5 minutes later, he was scrolling through his phone. The operation began. I made eye contact with Jonas, then blinked. 3 short blinks, 3 long blinks, 3 short blinks. SOS. Jonas looked horrified. At first he genuinely thought something was medically wrong with me. He glanced around the room, looked back at me, then slowly pulled out the Morse code sheet hidden beneath his desk. A moment later realization hit him. His eyes widened, then he blinked back. The message took almost 2 minutes to decode. It simply said, "Hi." Honestly, it was the funniest thing I'd seen all week. For the rest of detention we communicated entirely through blinking. The conversations were painfully slow. A simple sentence could take several minutes. But compared to staring at a wall, it was incredible. We discussed weekend plans, teachers, video games, homework, anything we could think of. By the end of the hour my eyes felt like they had completed an Olympic event. But I had survived detention without losing my sanity. That alone felt like victory. The following week things escalated. Because Jonas had made a critical mistake. He told other people. Soon there were 3 of us. Then 4. Then 5. Within a month, Half the detention regulars had learned enough Morse code to communicate. The room transformed into the world's weirdest social network. From the outside, everything looked perfectly normal. Students sat silently, nobody talked, nobody moved. Mr. Schwartz believed he had complete control. Meanwhile, entire conversations were happening right in front of him. One afternoon we spent nearly 30 minutes discussing whether our math teacher's hair was actually real. The evidence against him was surprisingly strong. Another day, he organized an entire weekend hangout through blinking alone. One student even managed to ask another girl to a school dance using Morse code. Shockingly, she said yes. To this day I still don't know whether she was impressed or concerned. The funniest part was how confident we became. Every successful detention convinced us we were geniuses. We genuinely believed we had created the perfect system. Then one afternoon somebody ruined everything. As always, we were communicating through blinking. The topic had shifted toward Mr. Schwartz. Specifically, his haircut. One student transmitted a joke. Another repeated it, then another. Like a chain reaction, the message spread across the room. Eventually everyone received it. And unfortunately it was hilarious. I don't even remember the joke anymore. Only the result. Every single one of us burst out laughing at exactly the same time. Imagine sitting in a silent room for 40 minutes and suddenly 6 teenagers start laughing simultaneously while facing different directions. It was unbelievably suspicious. Mr. Schwartz looked up immediately. The room went silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For several seconds he just stared at us. Then he asked, "What's so funny?" Nobody answered. He asked again. Still nothing. The silence became unbearable. Finally he stood up. "Somebody explain." That's when Kevin cracked. Kevin was new to detention. Kevin folded under pressure faster than a lawn chair. Panicking, he blurted out, "Nothing. We were just blinking at each other." The second the words left his mouth, every single person in the room wanted to strangle him. Mr. Schwartz looked confused. Then suspicious, then deeply concerned. Blinking at each other, nobody said another word. The next afternoon we discovered the consequences. Taped directly to the wall was a brand new rule, in giant bold letters. No communication of any kind, including excessive blinking patterns. I actually laughed out loud when I saw it. Someone had really typed that sentence. Some administrator had sat at a computer and formally declared war on blinking. It felt like an accomplishment. Most students never leave a legacy. I got blinking banned. Unfortunately, our celebration didn't last long. Mr. Schwartz also rearranged the room. Now everyone sat facing different walls. No eye contact, no communication, no opportunities. The detention room suddenly looked like an interrogation chamber. Most people would have accepted defeat. We did not. Instead, we adapted. If blinking was banned, we'd use sound. That's when we switched to finger tapping. Morse code works perfectly through taps, dots, dashes. Simple. Within days conversations resumed. This version was actually better, much faster, much easier. Soon messages were bouncing around a room again. At first we were careful. Then we got comfortable. Then Eric joined. Every group has an Eric, the guy who takes a perfectly functional system and destroys it through sheer enthusiasm. Instead of subtle tapping, Eric hammered on his desk like he was trying to contact alien civilizations. The kid communicated in Morse code with the intensity of a drummer during a rock concert. One afternoon he spent nearly 10 straight minutes transmitting a story about a fight he'd witnessed at a gas station. The noise was impossible to ignore. Eventually Mr. Schwartz stood up, walked over, and caught him mid-conversation. The next day another rule appeared. No tapping, rhythmic sounds, or repetitive noises. Another victory, another ban, another monument to our stupidity. By this point the administration had become obsessed with stopping us. Every week seemed to bring a new rule. No tapping, no blinking, no signaling, no coded communication, no repetitive movements, no deliberate coughing patterns. Yes, coughing patterns. Because somebody had actually attempted Morse code through coughing. I wish I were kidding. The detention handbook eventually became so specific that it sounded like it had been written for prisoners of war. Years later, after graduation, I ran into Mr. Schwartz at a grocery store. We talked for a few minutes. Eventually he recognized me. Then he started laughing. "You were the Morse code kid, weren't you?" I admitted it. He shook his head. "You know, before you guys, nobody ever thought we'd need a rule about blinking." I couldn't stop laughing. Because honestly, That's probably the greatest achievement my entire high school career. I wasn't valedictorian. I wasn't class president. I never won any awards. But somewhere in a forgotten detention room, there's probably still a faded sign reminding students that excessive blinking is prohibited, and that's my legacy.